Hello, everyone. I'm Kerry King, research scientist and assistant director at the Energy Institute at the University of Texas at Austin, and welcome to today's UT Energy Symposium for November. Oh, sorry, it's not November 5th, November 12th. Assistant director at the Energy Institute. What's that? November 12th, 2024. And before I introduce today's speaker more formally, I will point out the upcoming talks. Next week, we will have a talk by Clay Siegel, who's an energy and geopolitical risk strategist. His talk will be Oil in the Crosshairs, sort of a geopolitical look at oil and military strategy. And then we will not have a talk during the week of Thanksgiving. The final talk of the semester will be December 3rd by Murtaza Gandhi, who is a manager at Baker Risk, and they focus on safety and industrial facilities, including facilities associated with clean energy or low carbon energy, such as hydrogen facilities. And we will learn about his efforts in making sure we have a safe set of infrastructures. But today it is a pleasure to have Destiny Knock, who is assistant professor, civil and environmental engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. She's also the CEO of People's Energy Analytics. Our talk today is engineering and social justice using high resolution residential data to identify energy poverty in households. So a little bit more background on her. She's a leader in energy justice, environmental justice, sustainable energy transitions, and the energy poverty climate change nexus. Her current work, she is developing frameworks for understanding the sustainability and equity trade-offs for different power plant investments across the United States. And she has pioneered new measures of energy poverty to help utility companies identify vulnerable populations and energy deficits, and that's what she will speak to us today. She has a PhD in industrial engineering and operations research and 2 bachelor's degrees, 1 in electrical engineering and applied mathematics. So a summary of her talk today will be about income-based energy poverty metrics miss people's behavior patterns, particularly those who reduce their consumption to limit financial stress. She's going to talk about her methods for identifying energy poverty across millions of households using residential electricity consumption dataset. She will look at outdoor temperature at which households start using home cooling systems. And using this temperature, she'll calculate relative energy poverty within a region that she defines as the energy equity gap. I won't read more, so we don't spoil her findings here. But she finds considerable differences between her methods and the sort of traditional income-based measures of energy poverty, and that is what will be part of the focus of her talk today. So with that said, I am now going to hand the floor over to Dr. Knock and stop sharing my screen. And as always, please submit questions via the Q&A feature of Zoom, or if you're live on YouTube. And I will look to interject these questions as I can throughout her talk, or we'll save them until the end. With that said, Destiny, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me today. So we're going to dive right into engineering and social justice. So one of the things that I like to start off with is really highlighting that a lot of my work, or almost all of my work, is focused on trade-offs. Whenever we are trying to think about what the best energy system would be or what the best future will look like, we're always going to have trade-offs between different parts of that system. So on one hand, we, have equity, equality, and justice. There's also environmental sustainability and development and transition. And so, throughout my work, I, want to make sure that we understand exactly what trade-offs we're making for different energy system futures. That way we can hopefully end up somewhere in the perfect middle. So overall, there's a lot of different ways to make sure that you're doing equity and social justice work. And they're going to have differing levels of community engagement. So the first is going to be community informed, where the community is really your advisor. The second is community involved, where your community is your collaborator. And then the last one is community directed, where the community is really a leader. And so I would say that my work falls between community informed and community involved. I have the privilege of working with a lot of very active people that are directly working with communities, but then I will work with the advocates for communities in terms of how do I guide my research and my work. So let's get on the same page in terms of some definitions. So I view inequality as unequal access to opportunity. So we see here we have two kids, and this is from the famous Giving Tree book, where one kid is receiving like an apple, and the other kid's like, what on earth is happening? Then we have equality, where we have evenly distributed tools and assistance. And this kid that was previously receiving apples is like, oh my goodness, this ladder is amazing. I'm glad I can pick all these apples. And then the other kid over here is like, why is the world sucking so much right now? I have all these tools and assistance that are supposed to help me, but I haven't been able to reach the tree. So that's when we move to equity. These are custom tools that address differences and inequalities. So here we see that, the first kid has a ladder, the second kid has a slightly taller ladder, but they're both able now to reach and pick apples from the tree. And so a lot of times when I hear, debates about the fairness of something, a lot of times I do believe people are talking about the difference between equality and equity, because this person who's always had opportunities may feel like looking at this person, it's the world is unfair because their ladder is bigger. And lastly, we get to justice, which is fixing the system so that once we receive equal access to tools and opportunities, both of the kids are able to pick apples, right? So now the tree itself has been corrected, which has been the problem all along. So, and I actually realize I don't know if I can see hands raised, but one question I typically ask the audience is, how many of you have experienced pipe freezing in your home because somebody that you know or because you were trying to save money on their heating bills? Now, I've gotten varying degrees of this, and since I can't see you all in this webinar, I'll have to assume that there are some of you out there. But I will just let you know that this person in the picture is me. So in this, this was during the Christmas 2022 cold snap here in Pittsburgh, and I am a landlord. So my tenants, they were trying to save roughly $200 on their bill by reducing their heating. But the challenges that led to all the pipes freezing in their home, this here used to be the kitchen. We had to rip all the cabinets off the wall to get to the pipes. And that led to about $32,000 worth of damage, in addition to $6,000 for the pipes. And so whenever people are feeling like they're unable to pay for their energy bills, then that can lead to serious health, like, home stability and larger financial stability consequences, because it was unfortunate that we were no longer able to let the family stay in this home. And this happened right around Christmas. It took us 6 months to fix this property. And that's all because someone was trying to save money. Now, there were programs that we were hoping to get this person into to help pay for their electricity bill, such as the Low Income Housing Energy Assistance Program or some other programs that will help pay people's bills. But the challenge is those often have very long wait lists, and the administrative burden on families is pretty high, which leads them to not, be able to receive those resources in time. So when we're thinking about like, why is this happening? It's because trade-offs, right? I told you at the beginning, we're going to talk about trade-offs. And so there's trade-offs that people make every day between energy and other necessities. So the ideal point is that you would have all your energy needs satisfied. But on one hand, there are people that prioritize energy consumption, which can lead to an increased health risk because they're not spending money on food or medicine. And that's when we would see high energy burden, where energy burden is the percent of income that a person spends on their energy bill. And then we would also see unsafe heating practices, such as people using their ovens to heat their homes or using space heaters to heat their homes. Now, on the other hand, we have people that prioritize other necessities. So these are people that are going to prioritize paying for food and medicine before they pay for their energy bills. And so this can lead to increased risk, like a health risk from cold or heat-related illnesses. Specifically, we see that there are some people that experience an inability to cool or heat their homes to desired temperature. So this is like, for example, if someone has a broken air conditioner and can't afford to fix it. And then we also see utility shutoffs from people who have foregone paying their energy bills. So when we think about the most common metric, which people use to identify energy poverty, that's going to be energy burden. And again, energy burden is the percent of income that a person spends on their energy bills. So here I have illustrated one household that makes $51,000 a year. Based on their gross income and their energy bills, their energy burden is 4.32%. Now, I will say that the threshold for energy burden is typically 6 or 10%. So this household would not be considered energy poor under the energy burden measure. But, the other thing is that there's a lot of things people have to pay for before they get to their energy bill, right? So yes, you have gross income, but then you got to pay for taxes. You have to pay for dwelling costs, right? Your rent, your mortgage, because if you don't have a place to live, you're not going to have an energy bill. And then after we include student debt, commuting costs, and groceries, right? Because eating is, we're told, is a good thing. Their energy burden looks like it's actually about 32% of their disposable income. Now, this is a 3-person house without an air conditioner. So the thing that energy burden has also missed is that this house does not have a working air conditioning unit to protect themselves from heat waves. So yes, this person's energy burden is low, but there's also an infrastructure deficit that they are experiencing in the summer, which, we want to try to account for. So that's why I've proposed energy limiting behavior, which is a hidden inequity. So on one hand, you're able to satisfy all of your demand, but at a very high cost. That's going to be what we call high energy burden. On the other hand, you're unable to satisfy any of your demand, meaning that you might be an outage or disconnected. And our challenge is to find people in the built environment who are suffering because they're only able to satisfy partial needs, but they may be at risk. So as we're moving into the winter, this might be people that are keeping their heat very low, meaning they're wearing blankets, or if they keep their home so low, right, then they're going to experience potentially pipes freezing in their home. So I believe household meters are a large untapped data source. Energy meters measure how much energy a household uses on a second-by-second, daily, or monthly basis. And in 2021, electric utilities were reported to have 111 million advanced metering infrastructure installations, which is about 69% of total electric meter installations. So when we are looking at using this data, what we do is we start with gathering the household level utility data. We match this with a demographic survey, which gives us information about the home's income, their race, the house size. We then also gather local temperature data, and we'll calculate the balance points of energy usage over the summer and the winter. And then we're going to calculate our balance point gap. So what we do for each individual household is we run this 5-point regression to identify electricity consumption behavior for individual houses. On the y-axis, we have daily consumption in kilowatt hours. And on the x-axis, we have the daily mean outdoor temperature in Fahrenheit. And we have the heating slope, which lets us know how people are using energy as they're moving into the winter. The heating balance point is the first outdoor temperature at which the heating system kicks on. The base load is going to be all of the non-temperature dependent energy usage, such as water heating, cooking, lighting, and refrigeration. And then the cooling balance point, that's the first outdoor temperature at which the cooling systems kick on. And then the cooling slope, that is how people are using their air conditioners as you move deeper into the summer. So here is an example from one household. I'm actually going to show you all some information from Chicago. I know the abstract said Arizona, but our Chicago data has both the winter and summer periods. So on the y-axis, again, we have the total electricity consumption on the daily level, and the x-axis is the daily outdoor average temperature. And this is a house in Chicago, which has the heating component in red, the yellow component is the base load, and the blue component is going to be the cooling. But then we also notice that there are cooling only houses. So here, our base load is yellow, our cooling component is blue. So this would most likely be a house that has natural gas or oil heating. But knowing Chicago, it's probably natural gas. But we do see that they most likely have a centralized air conditioning unit. And of course, the other side is going to be the heating only case. So this is actually how we can more effectively find houses that are at risk during the summer at scale, because this house does have an electric heating component. But once we see this base load just kind of tapers off, that means that they do not have an air conditioning unit, because even if they had a window unit, we would see this tick up slightly. Now, they might have fans here or something, but it's definitely not a centralized air conditioning unit. And so that is going to highlight some of the infrastructure deficits that we need to find. So again, I told you we're going to look at Chicago. We looked at over 20,000 households in the ComEd territory. The climate is going to be very intense winters, slightly more mild summers, but it can get hot. And if you're wondering where Chicago is, Illinois, it's in the state of Illinois, which is in this red box, right? So a little bit far from Texas where y'all are, but still in the United States. So for Chicago, we're going to start with the cooling side, because we had more data for that. So we had smart meter data for 150,000 households in the Chicago region. And on the y-axis is our cooling balance point. The x-axis has our different income groups, where one is the smallest income group. It's the lowest income group, those that make less than $15,000 a year. So these are going to be people that make less than minimum wage. We have income group 8, which are those that make more than $150,000 a year. And we see that there is a gap between them. So the lowest income group starts using their air conditioners on average at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, these are average temperatures, so you got to account for the high of the day and the low of the night in these. But the highest income group, group 8, starts using their cooling at around 63 degrees Fahrenheit. And we do notice that there are step downs as we move up in income groups. So this energy equity gap between them is 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that does indicate to us that there is most likely an income disparity between these houses in the region, because if everyone was able to use their energy whenever they wanted, we would expect people to start using their cooling systems around the same outdoor temperature. Now we ask the same question in the winter, right? How does this look in the winter? And we see that in the heating sector, the low income group actually starts using their heat earlier than the high income group. So we have here we had smart meter data for 20,000 houses. On the y-axis is the heating balance point, which is the first outdoor temperature at which houses start using their heating systems. The x-axis once again has income groups, and we see that the lowest income group, their heat kicks on around 58 degrees Fahrenheit. But the higher income groups, so group 6, 7, and 8, see their heat kick on around 50 or 51 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's an even larger gap of 8 degrees in the winter. And you might be asking, why are low income groups using their heat earlier in the winter when they were delaying it in the summer? So we have a couple of hypotheses. One is that it's easier to leave your house during the hottest time of the day, because that's when everything is open, whereas during the coldest time of the day at night, things are closed and you're kind of stuck in your house. The other thing is, when looking at the residential electricity consumption survey done by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, when looking at thermostat set points, everybody started using their thermostats around similar temperatures, so within 1 or 2 degrees of each other. So that leads us to believe that housing characteristics and lack of insulation is driving low-income groups to use their heating systems earlier in the winter. And I will say that this is Hoang et al. 2023, so this paper actually is published now. So let's recap. So what we did was we looked across income groups at the energy equity gap, and we put electricity usage in households on the Y, and we put outdoor temperatures on the X. And our high income groups, which are the groups that we would expect do not have a budget constraint on their energy usage, is going to be the blue line here. So then we found the cooling balance point, which is the first outdoor temperature at which we see a household kick on their AC unit. And then we have the low income groups in black. And in the summer, we noticed that low income groups wait longer than high income groups to start using their air conditioning systems. And this gap was roughly 4 to 7.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And then in the winter, we see the opposite effect, where low-income groups start using their heat earlier, most likely due to insulation challenges. Then one of the things that I haven't presented here is that we did also see a gap between high and low income groups later in the summer. So one thing that I will ask you all is, to ponder is how many households do you believe overlapped between multiple insecurity types? So the insecurity types that we talked about were high energy burden, energy limiting behavior early in the summer, and energy limiting behavior throughout the summer, which were those infrastructure deficits. And as a reminder, there were 150,000 households in the summer analysis. All right. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, hopefully you all have wrote down whatever number you believe overlapped out of 150,000. And so I will let you know that it's always less than 50 households, right? So here, the blue represents the total houses in the Chicago region. The orange represents high energy burden. The red represents people that wait long into the summer to start using their cooling systems. And the green is the cooling slope, which is those that most likely don't even have a window unit and most definitely do not have a centralized unit in their home, a centralized air conditioning unit. So here, these are supposed to be Venn diagrams, but we see this very minimal overlap between each of these circles. You might be asking, well, why on earth is that? Well, high energy burden assumes working infrastructure or centralized air conditioning, but these houses might not have insulation. On the other hand, energy limiting behavior earlier in the summer, these are houses that delay turning on their air conditioning units until late in the summer. So they are working very hard to reduce their energy consumption to save money on their bills. And so, that's the thing. People are extremely, extremely smart. And if they can reduce their bills, then they will work really hard to do that. And of course, the last one, energy limiting behavior throughout the season, this is where we would assume that people have a broken or no air conditioning systems, because even when the temperatures spike above 90 degrees for the maximum temperature, we don't see any type of air conditioning usage. And so, from that, we would logically assume that either people feel like they cannot use it at all, and that's when people just don't buy those air conditioning systems, or they have a broken air conditioning system and cannot afford to fix it. So one of the things that I've done to operationalize this is I've started my company, People's Energy Analytics, which is a spin out of all the research I just presented to you. And so here is an example of one of our customer classification dashboards. So typically, at least from the work that I've seen, when I talk to people, they want to look at zip code hotspots, which you're seeing on these maps up here. And they'll say, okay, let's take one here. Okay, let me step back. So these maps are showing you zip codes to target for those that have a high cold risk. That's the blue. The red are those that have high energy burdens. So again, these are people that spend a lot of money on their bills, which we're classifying as more than 10% of their income on their bills. And then the orange here is representing those that are lacking air conditioners. Okay. And then the second row down here, which I've stagnated just due to privacy concerns. But these are the individual accounts. Okay, so what happens is you'll click on this zip code here, and then that will pop up the most at-risk accounts within that zip code territory. Now, a lot of times when I see other people, they're doing these zip code hotspots, but the challenge is there's a lot of people in one zip code, right? And we always want to make sure that we are targeting, one, the right households based on their risk level, but also targeting them with the right type of intervention. So if we take this energy burden map here, and we see this red hot spot in the middle left-hand quadrant, then we'd say, okay, let's go talk to all these people. And you can click on it, and down here will pop up the most at risk. And you do see like we got 16.9%. So all these are above 10 for each individual house. But if you only looked at zip codes, you'd be ignoring this entire northern edge. And so now you might ask yourself, well, why are we going to ignore that northern edge? Well, if we come over here to regions lacking air conditioners, well, it's just because they don't have any, right? So because the air conditioner represents 40 to 70% of your energy bill in the summer, right? If you don't have that, you're just not going to spend as much money as your neighbors. And so that's why it's very important to understand these different dimensions, because somebody experiencing a high energy burden, but having a working air conditioner, a key intervention might be weatherization, it might be bill assistance. But if someone doesn't have an air conditioner, then the key intervention would be heat pump deployment, energy efficiency technology deployment, or some other thing. And then once we can get down to these individual accounts, what my company does is we will also work with utilities to directly market to each of these individual houses based on the different risk types. So we can now market weatherization, right? We can market energy efficient technologies. We can market bill assistance to them. And that does help us scale up not only how we identify people, but also how we connect them to the services that they need. So in conclusion, we looked at multiple houses across their different income groups, and we found that people tend to reduce their energy consumption to save money on their energy bills. Now, these houses were previously missed under traditional income-based measures, and following the identification of disparities, we can more effectively target upgrades within the built environment, right? We're going to want to upgrade housing stock, right? So weatherizing homes. We're going to want to upgrade energy infrastructure by deploying more efficient heating systems and heat pumps. And then we can also track, did people take up these technologies? And then we can see how did that impact their ability to adapt to heat waves as well as deep freezes. So I would like to thank you all for listening to my talk. I'll actually say don't follow this Twitter anymore. My Twitter got hacked. So if you want, you'll follow me on Blue Sky. I'll have to update that because it just got hacked 2 days ago. But if you would like to look at any of the papers that I referenced in this talk, they're right here. And also there's my company, People's Energy Analytics, which also has a LinkedIn page, which does post updates regularly. And I would be amiss if I did not thank my SPICE team. So this is a picture of all the researchers that have helped me complete this work. So thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Destiny. All right, well, I'll start it off a little bit. Here's a long question I'll have to try to sift through here. So I'll start one myself on I guess kind of on your Chicago example there and the lack of air conditioning on the east side. I'll just see if you have any additional insights as to why that might be. Are they getting, I don't know, lake effect? Is there just a reason why that might be the case? Are there high-rise buildings? Or maybe that's a general question. What can you learn from these energy meters for multi-family buildings, maybe not just even small apartments, but large apartments? Is it hard to get this kind of data or to make these insights when you don't have single family homes? Is there any insights there that you've learned?
So I think in terms of these insights, single family versus apartment is not as important as how many meters there are, right? So if one meter serves multiple apartments, then that can lead to some inconsistencies in the findings. But if there's 1 meter per dwelling unit, then it will be fine. Now, in terms of the lake effect, I do believe that, in the past, houses were built to capture that lake effect, right? But one of the things that we know, and I'm sure you all know very well in Texas, is these extreme temperatures are not what they used to be. And so even in Massachusetts, when I lived there, my houses did not come with air conditioning units because, 30 years ago, they just didn't need them that much. And so one of the challenges is like trying to update our housing stock to account for the change in temperatures and the change in extreme weather events. Because as we know, housing stock is very slow to change, right? Like I live in a 100-year-old house right now. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. Okay. A question here is relating to you sort of started to allude to it, maybe with the age of housing stock. And the question is kind of about building codes and this kind of thing. Austin's, decades ago was somewhat on the forefront of enhanced building code, but even struggle here to have improved building codes for our weather systems. Are there any insights and for your Chicago example or anywhere else? Have you thought about, or do you think you could figure out differences in places that do have higher building code standards, or anything you can say about building code standards and ability to back this, see if that's how effective they are?
In terms of building code standards, I do think that like as the building codes improve for better insulation, like that does help lessen this issue, because one of the challenges that we're seeing with like the low income housing is that it's often in older buildings. And so, for example, I live in a 100-year-old house right now, and my kitchen is freezing, and my pipes freeze a lot. So as we are looking at building codes, like, just back in the day, they didn't have some of the interventions. Like that's why weatherization is so big right now, right? But when I looked up how much it would cost to weatherize my home, it was going to be around $10,000. And I had just moved here. So that one got put on hold. And I think the challenge is like there's this homeowners debate between small costs and large upfront costs, right? Because weatherizing my home won't take my energy bill to zero. It will reduce my energy bill each month. But, if it's reducing it by $50, how long does it take me to recoup the cost of 10 grand, right? Now, the other hard part is it's hard to put a price on comfort because during the pandemic, I hated working from my kitchen. It is just very cold in there. And then also like having to drip our pipes in the winter, right? Because we're worried about them freezing. That also is going to be a little bit of a challenge. So as building codes increase in standards, I think it's really great. The other challenge is that typically wealthier families live in newer homes. And then if you also have, it also matters if you have good insulation. So in that duplex that I showed earlier that froze, where all the pipes froze, the tenant swore she did not have any insulation in her walls. But when we pulled off the walls, there was insulation. It was just that pink fiberglass insulation, and it had gotten wet. And so it was useless. Like that fiberglass insulation is useless once it gets wet. And so there are these, things that we're doing where we're insulating homes, but we're insulating them with things that will not last for the life of the house, right? And I do think like sometimes people try to say that houses will only last for 50 years, and that just is not that's just not reality. Yes. And if part of your question that I missed, please let me know.
No, I think that's pretty good. I mean, you're kind of bringing up a good point. I think it's not as much my area of expertise, but speaking of people who are try to focus on non-monetary metrics of whatever socioeconomic outcomes or well-being or this kind of thing, something like insulation is kind of what you're bringing up. Making the home more livable might not have a huge sort of monetary effect, but on the well-being side, a much larger effect. And maybe that can anyway. We have some programs for it, but they could be enhanced, and there's some weatherization through the I guess Inflation Reduction Act and these kinds of things we're getting emphasized. So hopefully your work can help convince be supportive of people doing this and help target the areas that need it more. So
Right.
here's a question, a little analytic question. What are the time steps of the data you're using? But there's all kinds of meters out there. You kind of implied this. So is there any insights you can have of looking at areas that have kind of high resolution meter data, and how high resolution data have you looked at versus low resolution data, which I guess might be monthly at the worst case?
Yeah.
And how hard that makes it for you, or do you still get some insights? How do you think about that?
So through my company, we have worked with both high resolution data, where we will often look at it at like the daily level, sometimes 30 minutes, but normally daily. And then we also have looked at the low resolution monthly level data as well. Now, if you want to find the first outdoor temperature at which people are turning on their systems, that's going to be the daily. Because, and it's all about decision making, right? So whenever people are thinking about switching their thermostats, that's going to happen when it's starting to get hot or it's starting to get cold, right? People make those decisions typically on the daily level. Now, in terms of like infrastructure deficits and energy burdens, we are able to use monthly level data to do that, because buying energy infrastructure, that happens on a seasonal level, right? So whenever we are trying to understand what insights we can get from the data, I will always try to take it back to when do people make decisions and what are the time scales that people make decisions on. So even though sometimes utilities will share the second by second data with me, when we are deciding when to aggregate that data or what level to aggregate that data to, I take it to the decision on which people are making decisions about how to use their energy systems within their home.
All right. So for these purposes, would it be safe to say that something like, I don't know, less than 1 hour data is sort of not that important for thinking about these kind of issues here, or am I overstating?
Yeah, I would say if it's less than 1 hour, you're not going to, it's going to be really difficult to analyze because people are not sitting at their thermostat every 30 minutes changing it,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Or it's automatically programmed or who knows what.
Yeah.
So, okay, very well. That's good, good insight here. There's a question about energy burden, energy security, any of the metrics you're looking at on homeowners versus renters. Question, I assume renters have a higher income burden or energy insecurity than owners. Is this the case, or have any insights here in ownership versus renting?
So in terms of the homeowners versus renters, I would say that, that's going to be like getting at that question is going to be a bit challenging. One, because I really want to answer that question on like the disposable income, right? Because if you are a homeowner and your mortgage is locked in for 30 years and that can never increase, we know rent goes up every single year typically. At least when I was a renter, my landlord was increasing my rent every year. So even though the housing structure stayed the same, the amount of money I could spend on my energy bills would go down. Um, Now, in general, I would assume that renters have higher energy burdens because more low-income people are renters. So as a class of people, renters are typically more low income than homeowners. So that is true. Now, can landlords do more to reduce energy burden of the renters? Yes. The challenge is sometimes those incentives are not designed for landlords to make use of. So for example, when I was trying to get my duplex revamped, there's a lot of like weatherization programs, energy efficient technology programs, but like to make use of the subsidies for low income people, I had to have a low income tenant living there. Well, I couldn't have somebody living there because all the walls were open and the kitchen was open. But like when the walls are open, that's the best time to insulate a home, right? So there was this huge like debacle. And then, we're looking at it like, well, we're losing money every month because we have to pay the mortgage. Now we're covering our mortgage and the duplex mortgage. And it's not being covered by anybody living there. And so then we're like, you know what? Just close up all the walls. We will just deal with it later. And that's the challenge right now that the walls are all closed up, converting that house from a natural gas house to an electric house, right? Weatherizing that house. It just is much more expensive. But again, like we were just trying to deal with the fact that we had to pay for all the pipes in the rehab and adding $20,000 on top of that to upgrade the circuit panel to add in an electric stove and electric heating system. And on top of that, like $7,000 for insulation, it just wasn't going to happen. And there's a lot of programs out there, right? That people are like, why don't landlords make use of these? Well, there are some things that are in the fine print that do make it a bit challenging for landlords to take those up. And even I was thinking, like, could I just agree to have a low income tenant in there? Once the rehab was done, but there is like nobody really to call, right, when that was happening. So yes, I'm sorry. You guys see this little toy? The baby is not at daycare.
Yeah.
She is right here and she wants to be involved in the talk. So she's my energy affordability assistant right now. So yes.
Says Destiny is the definition of showing a supermom here working. So everybody, please give her some good applause for that. I'll give her some applause for that. So yeah, that's an interesting point on at least your particular instance of landlord and having a great opportunity to do a renovation and not being able to figure out their or being able to go through the programs and red tape to get that assistance. So just another example of how it's always details that matter. Here is a question on just the idea of heat islands. I guess we think about that down here in our cities. Is this an area for future study? We talked about time resolution in some sense, and then you talked about spatial resolution to a degree and getting beyond the zip code. I don't know how much you get to look at that, or maybe in private with utilities, or they use the data. What do you think about heat islands, and what are the challenges? And maybe the resolution is not that important because the utility can find the exact customer. I don't know. What are your insights there?
So with heat islands, I do believe that if we accounted for heat islands, that the gap between high and low income areas in terms of like when we see them cutting on their systems would be different, or this could explain some of the differences that we see. Now, I have not been able to do that because one of the challenges is that I don't typically get the addresses of where people live. And so with heat islands, right, you really need to get down to the point. Like you need to get as higher resolution as you can to pinpoint where exactly they are within the heat island, because it does matter. But like a lot of times I'm getting data on like zip code level. Sometimes I'll get it on the census level, which I love to, but even then, we use weather station data from NOAA to try to, look across these temperatures. So they don't always have a ton of weather stations to use. So that's just like one challenge with trying to get down to, this like really fine resolution of heat islands. But I do suspect that the gap would be a lot wider just based on talking with utilities that I've partnered with.
Right. There's a question on essentially natural gas data. You showed the example where there seemed to be, no heating, but implying that, okay, there must be probably some other heating system in Chicago, natural gas, or some kind of fuel oil, or who knows what. So have you thought about doing this kind of analysis on the natural gas? And if you have, has there been challenges that are harder than looking at electricity, or any other insights?
Yeah, so we actually through my company, we actually have two pretty large customers. One is Peoples Gas here in Pittsburgh, which is a natural gas company, and the other one is Southern Company, which is across Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. So like between them, we're analyzing 6 million. We should be analyzing around 6 million houses. And so Peoples Gas is natural gas data. They don't have electricity data, at least not that I'm aware of. And so by working with them, we are currently looking at, what houses are not using heating systems in the winter. Like, who do we think is at pipe freeze risk, and who do we think is having like a high energy burden based on their gas consumption? And so for there, we are finding similar insights for the winter side. I will say that, we've been analyzing the monthly data for People's Gas, so we haven't looked necessarily across the daily level, but we've been looking across the monthly. And even just like, trying to understand like who's in their customer assistance programs, how do we more effectively target to them? We actually rolling that out, hopefully within the next month, to actually see like how does targeting people in very specific ways based on the different risks that they're finding, how does that influence whether or not they actually attempt to sign up for these programs? And then also trying to more streamline the process for that, because a lot of times people won't apply for these things that they believe they won't qualify for, or that will take a really long time. And so that's something that we're doing on the natural gas side.
Great. All right, excellent. Here's a question on, I guess, home solar, residential solar. Do you see any effect of residential solar on homes, or you don't know that data, or the places you've looked at don't have that much solar, or are there any insights to see some behavioral patterns, I guess, differences?
Yeah, so what we did was I believe we took out the solar homes when we were doing this analysis, because we do believe that would conflate, what we are trying to show. So our main thing was trying to understand if there was a like temperature differences in energy usage between high and low income groups. Before I did this analysis, when I would talk to utility companies about what I believed was the case, the underlying assumption for most utilities is that people set their thermostats exactly where they want them to be, and that's that. Like, if you are not spending a lot of money on your energy bills, it's because you didn't want your thermostat higher. And so my whole analysis was about trying to show that there were actually trying to understand whether or not there were infrastructure income gaps between people, and if income was driving this disparity that we see. Whenever I would talk to utilities in the past, anyone that waited a long time into the summer or didn't have a tick up during the summer climactic events, they just assumed those people didn't need it. They didn't, it wasn't like, oh, they can't use their air conditioner, or oh, it's broken, or oh, they don't have one. It was, they probably don't need it, right? Because everybody sets their thermostats where they want them to be. That was the assumption. And so this research was really about trying to, again, I take it back to the community informed. When I was talking with a LAHEAP program manager, she was saying, I can't figure out why some people in my program use so little energy, they might as well be living in Kenya. Like, those were her exact words to me. I was like, you know what? Let's try to figure this out. Let's see if it's income driven. And so that's why we took out the solar homes. I do think that it would be interesting to look at solar and infrastructure differences. One of the challenges is that utilities sometimes don't have the information, right? If they don't do surveys to all of their customers about energy infrastructure in their homes, then they won't necessarily know who has an electric vehicle, who has a solar panel. Now you can, run some machine learning models, some artificial intelligence, neural networks, right, to try to get at like the different loads. And that's when you would want to hit the data at like the second by second minute type intervals, because then you will see like, you can pinpoint that with like cloudy days, right? You can pinpoint that with like hours where it's raining versus not. And then you can reasonably assume that somebody has a solar panel. Now, try to estimate the size of the solar panel, if they're using it, like if when it's low, it's an equity thing or a non-equity thing. I mean, that's going to be a whole nother bucket of worms that would take a lot more than 1 hour to to sift through.
Okay, here's it's a question kind of on the electrification, if you will. You can see that the Department of Energy has released a 2024 average operating cost for electricity, natural gas, propane, kerosene, heating oil for residential homes, and natural gas is the most affordable representative average unit cost, I guess, dollar per BTU or something like this. So how would you think about using your kind of analytics here to think about efforts of decarbonization and electrification? And does that sort of increase the energy burden, or how do we think about that and this difficulty? Any insights?
Yeah, that is something I'm actually talking with Massachusetts about right now too, because I'm helping them with one of their affordability cases, and the analyst there did say that when they electrify Massachusetts, once people shift away from natural gas, they do expect energy bills to go up when using heat pumps, especially when you get into extreme temperatures, because if a heat pump cannot basically convert the air to cooler in your home, or sorry, to warmer in your home, it will shift to resistance-based heating, which is one of the most expensive heating types out there. So yeah, energy burden will definitely go up if you switch from natural gas to electric. And I, so, some of the things that we are considering is, well, how do you change the rate, right? Because not everybody technically needs to pay the same exact rate for electricity, like if you're trying to make it equitable across. Um, One of the things that we saw when we did the Chicago analysis in Arizona is that when we saw the residential retail rate increase by 10%, houses that made less than, I believe, 50,000, they actually waited longer into the summer to start cooling their homes, right? But houses that made over 50,000, it was like they didn't even notice. And so that's one of the challenges of like trying to understand like what can people afford? When do people start showing hardships? Like, when will you start to see people, limit their consumption to try to save money on their bills? And that's something that I think that we could do really well with this data. And that's something that I have been, talking with some of my utility collaborators about. Because if you want to understand like when energy becomes unaffordable, you got to look at how they're using it, right? You got to look at, are they using it during a heat wave? Are they using it during a deep freeze? Do they feel like they can use it? Because there's a lot of other things. For me, for example, when I was in grad school, I was watching my energy bill like a hawk. Like we kept our thermostat on 55 degrees in the winter. I could see my breath in the house sometimes. And 55, that's where we kept it because that was the lowest temperature we could set it to without having to worry about whether or not our pipes would freeze. That's what we thought, right? And if we could have gone lower, my roommate would have turned off that thermostat. I'm telling you, I was one that came in and was like, no, you cannot turn off the thermostat. You got to keep it on at least, right? But now, right, I have a different type of salary. I'm not a grad student anymore. And I do feel more comfortable like turning on my my thermostat, and we kind of set it to now where we are more comfortable. If my baby runs pretty hot. So like we've kept it colder in our house during the summer to my husband's detriment. But it's like one of those things of like we can do that, and we're more willing to set it lower in the summer for the baby because she is an infant, right? And that's also something I hear when I go out into the community of grandmas who will keep their AC off and only pull out window units when they believe their grandkids are coming over, right? And you see like people will put their dependents first. So that's something which is really hard to try to answer, like what is the most affordable representative unit cost for people, right? Because people also have like medical needs, right? And as people are charging their electric vehicles in their home right now, you have the transportation costs tied to like whether or not you can afford your energy bill. So that does make it a bit challenging on this unit cost, because I do think that it depends. And one of the easiest ways to do that will be to look at past rates from utilities and understand where are the current inequities that we see and which households do need to be targeted based on different risk types that they have.
Yeah, you're reminding me, or speaking of graduate school, so I was here in Austin, but I spoke to other students who were in the Northeast, and I heard these similar stories. So they're saying, well, I don't hang out at home much. I go to the school where they have the heating on, and I hang out there. And I was thinking, yeah, maybe that's the way you graduate faster, because you're like, I'm going to go to where it's warm and might as well study it at school.
I did graduate faster, and I will say I also worked out a lot more because I was using the gym's showers, right?
There you go.
So
Yeah.
I think people are very resourceful, but it is like, now that I have a baby, I would never want to only be able to shower at the gym now that I have a child,
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a heat pump here, and I can attest that, yeah, my highest energy consumption months are actually a couple of the winter months when it was cold for, below freezing for a few days, and the resistance heater kind of kicks in, as opposed to the hottest summer day, which is similar close. And so, yeah, when we think about the electric grid here in Texas, we think, the winter peak could be, well, certainly if we electrify, be higher than the summer peak for air conditioning. So it's definitely a real issue. Well, I'll thank everybody online for a series of good questions here for our speaker, and I'll thank our speaker again today, It's been Destiny Knock, Assistant Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Carnegie Mellon University and the CEO of People's Energy Analytics. Thanks for joining us today for the UT Energy Symposium.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for staying and listening.
All right, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.